Hello and welcome back to a special edition of Reality Check. This week, we're looking at the possible connection between religious beliefs, Christianity and other religions, and the notion of an extraterrestrial or non-human intelligence. And joining us this week, I'm very honoured to have Congressman Tim Burchett, who's from Knoxville, Tennessee, and he serves on the House Oversight and Accountability Committee. I've had the pleasure of getting to know Tim before, and he's one of the more prominent members of what's becoming loosely called the UAP caucus, a group of mainly lower house members who are pushing for greater transparency and openness from the US government, defence and intelligence community on the subject of non-human intelligence. And I've also got with me today Dr. Paul Thigpen, who's from Savannah, Georgia. He's a retired professor of religious history and historical theology, a prolific best-selling author. What is it, Paul? 58 books or something ridiculous? How many have you written?
60.
60. I mean, that's just an overachiever. But you're now a journalist with a PhD in historical theology, and you were once an atheist. Then you became a Protestant pastor. Then you went into the Catholic Church, and you've actually served at quite a high level on the National Advisory Committee for US Catholic bishops. But most interestingly, you've been the author about 2 years ago of a book with a very provocative title, Extraterrestrial Intelligence and the Catholic Faith. Now, I guess I want to start today by saying on the polls, 74% of Americans in the United States say that they believe in God. Yet a lesser percentage of Americans, that's 65%, believe that intelligent life exists on other planets. And an even lesser percentage, 51%, believe that the UFOs, UAPs that are reported by witnesses on this planet are likely evidence of intelligent life from outside Earth. And when you get to the issue of who in America definitely believes that UAPs are evidence of a non-human intelligence, there's only 11% of Americans believe in definitely a non-human intelligence engaging with this planet. So what's going on here, gentlemen? Do you want to start, Paul? You're the theoretician, you're the professor who's made a study of this. Where do you stand on the issue of extraterrestrial or non-human intelligence and religious belief? Why is there such a huge difference in belief?
I think it has a lot to do with our surrounding culture, at least in the United States. The truth is, a good portion of my book is looking at the history of what I call the ETI, extraterrestrial intelligence conversation, and all the way back to the ancient Greeks, so back 2,500 years. And it's interesting to see that historically, our period is the anomalous period, in that the majority of people don't believe in other kinds of non-human intelligence. So Christians certainly believe in angels. That's a form of NHI. But up until early 20th century, it was the norm for theologians, for philosophers, others to accept the possibility and to take it seriously. And so we're the exception to the.
Can I stop you there for a moment, Paul? So the notion in the Christian faith of angels, you would say that angels are a form of non-human intelligence. And I guess by definition, then, that would also include God, who Christians believe is a creator of humans and other animals and creatures, and also demons, the evil creatures associated with those religious beliefs. Are they all non-human intelligence in your understanding?
Well, yes, demons are actually angels. They're just the ones who fell, who turned away from God. But in their essence, they're angels. And I don't usually think of God as non-human intelligence, but of course, yes, he's intelligent. He's personal. He's not some impersonal force. But when I speak of NHI, I'm not non-human intelligence. I'm usually talking about God's creatures rather than God himself.
Okay, so Tim, let's come to you, sir. I'm fascinated by the references in the Bible to what sound like anomalous paranormal events. And Paul, I know you take a contrary view on this, which is going to be the fun part of this program. But I'm going to read an excerpt from firstly Acts 1:9. And it's the story of what happened to Jesus after he was resurrected, which is probably quite apt for the coming weekend. He was taken up into heaven. And in Acts 1:9, quote, "After he said this, he was taken up before their very eyes, and a cloud hid him from their sight. They were looking intently up into the sky as he was going, when suddenly two men dressed in white stood beside them. 'Men of Galilee,' they said, 'why do you stand here looking into the sky? This same Jesus who has been taken from you into heaven will come back in the same way you have seen him go into heaven.'" And then, Tim, before I bring you in on this, I also like Ezekiel 1:4-6, quote, "Then I looked, and behold, a whirlwind was coming out of the north, a great cloud with raging fire engulfing itself, and brightness was all around it, and radiating out of its midst like the color of amber, out of the midst of the fire. Also from within it came the likeness of 4 living creatures, and this was their appearance. They had the likeness of a man. Each one had 4 faces, and each one had 4 wings." Now, I know there are lots of references in the Bible that sound extraordinary, paranormal, and anomalous, but I guess to my very biased ear, aren't we talking there about the possibility of non-human intelligence, flying saucers, UFOs, Tim?
Well, if I could address the Ezekiel part first, I've talked about that a lot and I've read up on that. And, I maybe not be I'm not as learned as my friend here from Georgia, but I've lived my whole life. I've read my Bible and I'm a born again Christian, and I have no problem with there being other life forms out there. I don't see the Bible limits that. I hear people say that it does, but I just don't in the vastness of God's great universe. But Ezekiel, Ezekiel saw the wheel, and it was this is a King James interpretation from, I believe, my friend there, is it Aramaic? Is that what the Bible was probably spoken in originally? I think, I'm not sure. But, this is a translation. So this is people that didn't have the advancements that we have and are comparing seeing something to something that they know, all they know about. And so I think Ezekiel I think he's talking about a flying saucer of sorts. I think, but the other verse, I believe you said about Acts, I've read that before, and I've read different interpretations. And we were always taught to believe that those were angels, or and there was 2 of them, and I've heard that could have been the 2. There was 2 reference. I can't remember the exact. I haven't done my research on this right now, but I guess long story short, I have no problem believing that there's mentions of extraterrestrials in the Bible, and it doesn't question my faith one bit. It doesn't hurt it or damage it. Matter of fact, it makes it stronger. It makes it a lot more vast than we as Christians sometimes make it this little comfortable little box on this little round rock we call Earth.
So, Paul, is the notion of angels incompatible with the notion of aliens? Is it possible that we're talking about one and the same thing? Is God perhaps, good heavens, I hope I'm not saying this in a heretical or insulting way to people of religious faith, but is it possible that God is an alien?
Wow. I would, God's, at least in the Christian faith, God is in a totally different category from what we might consider an alien. Whatever aliens exist are his creation. He's not one of them. And excuse me, angels are a non-human intelligence, but I don't think we want to automatically kind of equate them with angels in some way. What I like to say is this: when you look at the experiences that people have with unidentified aerial phenomena today, what often happens when they describe their experience and to people who don't believe in such things, and what's always the response? Oh, well, you must have really X, Y, or Z. you had a hallucination, you had a dream, you're drunk, you saw swamp gas, whatever. Because what they're doing is they dismiss what the person says because they don't believe in what that person thinks it was, but they believe in something else. So they'll make the identification there. And I think we have to be careful with sacred text the same way that the passage in Acts is, I think, is very clear. It says appearance of men, but very clear in the Christian tradition that those were angels. And in Ezekiel, it's very clear in the Christian tradition and in the rest of the context that in both cases that this was not unidentified to the people who were seeing it. They knew exactly what they were seeing, and they gave an interpretation of what it was. So I think we have to respect that, both the observers and those who recorded it and the tradition since then, that it is, I take it that that's exactly what it was, that they were angels. Even in Ezekiel, they were known as angels, but also the glory of the Lord. So to answer your question about aliens and angels, at least in the Catholic tradition, there's a very clear kind of definition, understanding that angels were non-human intelligence created before human beings were. Some of them fell and turned against God. Those are demons, some did not. That the word angel means messenger, that God still sends them to us to help us in various ways. And that they are purely spiritual beings. They don't have corporal bodies. They don't exist in space, that they can act on space. They don't move through space. And so to speak of alien in the sense of a creature from another planet or another dimension is really very different from the Catholic understanding of what an angel is.
Okay, so let's acknowledge here that obviously Christianity is one of many religions. The Islamic Quran, for example, there's a line in the Quran which says, "All praise is for Allah, Lord of all worlds." And there's another one, "And among his signs is the creation of the heavens and the earth, and of whatever living creatures he has spread forth in both. And he has the power to gather them together whenever he pleases." That's commonly interpreted by a lot of Islamist scholars as an acknowledgement by the Quran that there is indeed a notion of there being other intelligent living creatures in the universe. Let's start from basics. I'm intrigued by this line in Genesis, which says, in Genesis 1:27, quote, "So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them." Isn't that completely incompatible, gentlemen, with the idea of there being other intelligent living creatures that don't look like humans?
Who wants to start? I don't think it's incompatible at all. It's to be made in the image of God, again, in the Catholic tradition, is to have a rational intellect and a free will. And I would add that that's what we would call a spirit or soul, and that it's immortal. And so there's nothing there that says there can't be others who are like that. It's talking about this planet.
But he does say that we created man in the image of God. So if humankind is designed in the image of God, are we to assume that God is a humanoid and that the only dominant living creator creature is a humanoid creature, therefore we look like that humanoid creature? Or am I being too literal here? Tim, what's your view?
Well, I'm again, I'm not the biblical scholar, but you could say the same thing. Well, why are there black folks? Why are there Asian folks? Why are there white folks? Why are there, is God a chameleon? I mean, I could see that being, I just think he's talking about Earth, and I think he's talking about the likeness and maybe the profile. And as was stated, we're created with a soul. We're created in this general image. And I've talked to people who've talked about aliens from other planets and things like that, and they always call them a humanoid type thing. They have a face, they have arms and legs and things like that. So, but I like I said, I don't get too hung up on all that stuff. I really don't. I have enough confidence in the scripture to believe that it's, they're talking about Earth, and I agree with what was said earlier.
So, Paul, just to pin you down a little bit, because I am intrigued by that chapter in Genesis. If God made humankind in his or her own image, isn't that an implicit acknowledgement by the Bible, the text on which Christianity is based, that humans are essentially the same type of species, if you like, as God? Or am I being too literal?
Yeah, I think so. Well, too physical, maybe is a better way to put it. At least in the Catholic tradition, I'd say the majority of the Christian tradition, the image is not taken to mean the physical body. It's understood that God doesn't have a body except in the incarnation in Jesus Christ. It was God and took on a human nature with a body. But in his own essence, in his own being, he's pure spirit. But he is the supreme rational intellect. He has a supremely free will. He is immortal, and that in those ways we're made in the image of God. And I'm pretty sure a study of Judaism, I think that notion that that's what the image means, something like that, goes back to Jewish sources as well. I know in the Catholic faith, you'd be hard pressed to find some kind of statement that our bodies have to be in that image. The closest you get to that, St. Thomas Aquinas will say things like, when you talk about in the scripture the hand of God, then what that means is that we're made in his image, not he in ours, and that just as he has an active power that he can extend into the world to do things, we have hands that can extend into the world to do things. Doesn't mean that God has a physical hand, but it does mean that aspects even like that in a secondary way show that we're made like him.
Okay, so look, I've actually, the great thing for you gentlemen is that the very irreligious me in the last week or so, since I've been preparing for this interview, has been reading my Bible. And it's not something that Ross Coulthart has done a lot of in his lifetime. And I just want to say, whilst it hasn't converted me, it's given me a lot of thought. Because as well as that Ezekiel line that we discussed with both of you, there's also lines like this one, Zechariah 5. Again, I lifted my eyes and I saw, and behold, a flying scroll. And he said to me, what do you see? I answered, I see a flying scroll. Its length is 20 cubits and its width 10 cubits. And there's more. There's Kings 2:11. As they still went on and talked, behold, chariots of fire and horses of fire separated the two of them, and Elijah went up by a whirlwind into heaven. I mean, forgive me, maybe again I'm being too literal, but this is what the Bible says. That sounds like some kind of paranormal phenomena that's not inconsistent with what humans today, witnesses, describe as flying saucers, anomalous objects in our skies. How do we know they're not?
Again, let me take a stab at that. I think what they're doing is comparing it to what they know and what they have. Again, Ezekiel saw the wheel. The wheel was the most technologically advanced item they had at that time, and they're seeing something that I forget what a cubit is. I think well, I can't remember right now. My Baptist Sunday school lessons are fading in my memory at 59. I guess that's to be expected. But if you figure something, if it's half as wide as it is long, you're looking at a silhouette in the air, and that would, to me, would be a saucer. That would be the classic saucer right there. And I don't know, Paul, you take a shot at it. I'm not sure but that's what I see. I just see they're comparing something. They're possibly not educated people, and that's all they have to compare it to is what they know, and that at the time was a scroll.
Paul?
Well, again, sacred texts, you have to, if you accept them, the Catholic faith, broader Christian faith, as in some way revealing the Word of God and coming to Him from them, then it makes sense when you read the context of each of these, that to the people witnessing them, these weren't unidentified at all. They knew what they were. They knew that for instance, in Ezekiel, it talks about the glory of the Lord, and actually with the wheels and everything else, it's more closely aligned with what a great throne would look like for a king of that time. And so I don't think that it's, folks' ignorance kind of saying, well, here's a flying saucer. This is the best way I can describe it. But more that God reveals something to them, perhaps through angels, sometimes more directly. And they record what they see and they interpret it for us. And I don't want to say to them, well, I don't believe in such stuff, so you must really be seeing something else that I do believe in, like UFOs. The scroll, the context of that was that it was actually something written on there that he was to consume.
So I know that you're now a practicing Catholic, Paul, and it's interesting. I think it's very interesting to me that the Vatican particularly has been a church that has taken a very close interest in astronomy. Now, what's the Vatican's position? What's the Catholic Church's position on the possibility of non-human intelligence? And how does that fit in with, if you like, the Catholic Church's rejection of the Copernican idea, for which Galileo was, of course, tried and prosecuted, suggesting that the Earth wasn't at the center of the universe? I mean, 400 years ago, you had the Catholic Church punishing a scientist for espousing the view that humans weren't at the center of the universe, pushing the Copernican idea that indeed, there was an alternative explanation that the sun was at the center. So how do you reconcile that idea that I think has dominated Christian belief, that humans are very much at the center of God and ideas? How does God fit with NHI?
Great question. So there are actually several questions there. One of them, I think, is that one of the things the church learned at the time was that the notion that the Earth was at the center had actually been inherited from pre-Christian philosophy, from folks like Aristotle, and those have been largely a great influence in Christian thinking. And when it came to be seen that science is showing that's not the case, then right away you begin to have Christian leaders letting go of it and saying, well, that's not really essential to our faith. I'm sorry for what happened to Galileo at the time. And yet, Pope John Paul II has written favorably about Galileo and his testimony. The fact that the church could then go on and say, all right, let's let go of that non-Christian, actually, pre-Christian philosophy that led us to this position, let go of it and accommodate that. And that's one of the reasons why I think that the Catholic Church could accommodate a discovery or confirmation public of other kinds of non-human intelligence. But I'll also say, St. Augustine once said, he's one of my heroes, once said that God loves each one of us as if there were only one of us. And every parent of more than one child understands exactly what he means by that. You have your first child and you think, oh, I could never love another child like this. And then another one comes along and you say the same thing, and you realize that having multiple children to love does not divide your love, it multiplies your love. And I think for folks who have been concerned that the discovery of other intelligent species would somehow make us less special in God's eyes, they fail to understand this principle that's been part of Catholic faith for a long, long time, that we can be special and they can be special too. You can love them as much as
Congressman Burchett, I know that people like, for example, Lou Elizondo, who's obviously worked inside the Pentagon and investigated UAPs, UFOs. Lou's spoken publicly about the fact that there is a view among some people in the military, particularly in the US Air Force, apparently, a very strong evangelical position from evangelical Christians in the US Air Force, that is very hostile to the idea of engaging with the subject of UAPs, not because it's not real, but because there's a genuine concern that it's demonic, that it's evil. Where do you stand on that? Do you agree with Lou?
Well, I don't disagree with Lou. He's a friend, but I don't. I would probably modify that just a little bit. I think that there is a movement in the UFO community that people are opening themselves to demonic suggestion. I know people are doing seances and things to bring these craft down or in or something like that. And to me, it reeks of a of a demonic suggestion. You open yourself up to that. My dad used to say, if you open yourself up to that, that's when it happens. And not within the UFO movement, but I worry about that because there is a growing community that's what they do, and they talk about their spiritualism and things like that, and you know, it has all the essence of a classic seance, and I worry about that. I really do. You know,
So you're talking there about things like CE5, where there are groups that do meditation and they draw the phenomenon they claim to be engaging with a non-human intelligence. Is that what's concerning you, that those kind of so-called CE5 events, which are allegedly attracting the phenomenon, engaging with a non-human intelligence, the risk you see as a Christian is that might be demonic?
I do. It's just the power of suggestion. I have a friend and that does some of this, and I've seen them just gradually drawn in to this type of belief. And to me that's very disturbing. That's very disturbing. And I hear members of Congress talk about the demonic suggestion of this type of activity. So I try to stay afar. I don't, as I've stated many times, my main concern is what are we spending tens of millions of dollars on? If they tell me this thing, if it doesn't exist, why do we keep spending money? And then why won't they issue the reports to member of Congress? That's been my major concern with this. And as I've delved into it, I've found out about this community, and it is a growing community. But I'll tell you one thing I have learned in this. I want to tell you one thing I've learned in this. I'm going to have to go back because of Paul. I look like a complete idiot up here. I need to go back, and I'm going to have to start reading my Bible a little more, Paul. So one good deed you've done today as a good Catholic, you've told this old Southern Baptist he needs to go back and read his Bible, because now when you're saying these things, they draw back into my mind, the teachings that I had as a youth. So I apologize to y'all for my less than learned responses to some of your questions.
Now, Tim, I just want to pin you down on that a little bit. So you think it is likely that there are people in the military who are reluctant to engage with the UAP subject because they're genuinely fearful, as committed Christians, that this might be engaging in some way with demonic forces?
I don't know about in the military. I haven't spoken to anybody specifically in the military that believes that, but I do believe that is an ongoing phenomena in the UFO community, and that they are in fact doing those type of things that I would think would invoke some sort of demonic activity. And that's, to me, is kind of troubling.
Paul, what do you say to that?
Well, it's that notion, that concern that it's all demonic. It's in the evangelical community, but also in some of the Catholic community. And my great concern is that the reasons folks who think that will say it. First of all, they believe that it's contrary to Catholic faith, that such a thing could exist. I think if they read my book, they might change their minds. It's plenty of room in the Catholic Christian faith to accommodate that notion. But also, there are examples of incidents in which people have encounters that sure fit the classic diabolical profile. I'll just mention one that I was listening to a podcast, won't mention his name, but someone well-known in the community who had been involved with Skinwalker Ranch and these things, and talking about the so-called hitchhiker phenomenon. And he says that at one point, if I'm not misrepresenting him, that the thing kind of inside was invisible, seized him, and he began to speak through his mouth with a voice that wasn't his. That's kind of a classical profile of Christian thinking that would be diabolical, demonic possession. I'm not saying he was possessed, but I am saying things like that give people reason to, concerns. The abduction phenomenon in certain ways can seem like diabolical possession. My point is this. I think probably there is some overlap. We've got a lot of things going on here with regard to UAP. And I think there is some overlap, that there are some things that probably are diabolical. And I've never denied that. But that to go from that to take some incidents and then jump to the conclusion that it's all demonic, when the great majority of UAP does not fit any kind of diabolical profile as we've understood it. I think that's just a leap you can't make to make the absolute statement it's all demonic. It's a leap of logic you can't take.
So
I agree.
one of the things I've been doing in my research is I've been looking at the current Pope Francis, and of course his name before he became Pope was Jorge Mario Bergoglio. And it's interesting, there's some research that's appeared in the South American press where it turns out that the current Pope was a very close friend of one of Argentina's most prominent ufologists, a guy called Benito Segundo Reina, who was an Argentine Jesuit priest and astronomer who died in 1982. And apparently he was the most famous religious UAP enthusiast of the time in Argentina and very, very influential. And apparently he was the mentor of Jorge Mario Bergoglio, Pope Francis. Is this acknowledged inside the Vatican at all, Paul, that the current Pope has been very much a close friend and indeed mentored by a person who was very avowedly a ufologist and who apparently also there are other people who are well-known Argentine ufologists who claimed to receive messages from extraterrestrials that could be prophetic. And one of those prophecies told the current Pope, Pope Francis Bergoglio, that he was going to become Pope. Have you ever heard this before?
I heard it from you in a private conversation, that last part.
Yep.
And to be honest, I haven't heard it otherwise, but I will also be very clear. Do not have connections in the Vatican. I don't have kind of sources there that or in Argentina that you would have. So I'm not ruling any of that out. I'm just saying that I'm not aware of it personally.
No, one thing I do want to acknowledge is, look, I have to be honest, as a journalist, I've given the Catholic Church a pretty hard time over the years for, horrible instances of failure to properly investigate sexual abuse, for example. But one of the things I do admire is the Catholic Church's preparedness to discuss the possibility of extraterrestrial intelligence or non-human intelligence. It's been quite progressive in this regard. What does the current Pope say, and what have previous popes said about the possibility of a non-human intelligence?
Nothing I know of with Pope Francis that he said. Perhaps in a private audience he has, but I'm not aware of it. It is interesting, though, that with Pope St. John Paul II, probably the most popular Pope of our times, that he once was speaking at a parish, receiving questions from the audience. And a young girl asked him, "Holy Father, what about the aliens?" And this is so important to me that if he knew that that was contrary to the Catholic faith, I'm sure he would have said, because he would have had to say to her, "Well, young one, that's contrary to our faith." Or he could have said, "Well, we'll have to wait and see if science shows us that." He could have said a lot of things, but what he actually said was, "Always remember, they are God's children too." And that's my talk at the Soul Symposium. It took that as its name. And that's important because some of the folks who are claiming that it's all demonic, who are Catholic, insist that the Catholic Catechism has passages that rule it out. And I think it's very clear that those passages don't. But if there was anyone who would know what the Catechism's proper interpretation was, it was John Paul II who commissioned it, knew it well. And if he thought that they're God's children too and didn't think it was against the faith, then I'm sure that's not the intent of the Catechism.
So, Congressman Burchett, Tim Burchett, I know that you've met with David Grusch, that your oversight committee has heard evidence from David Grusch, I think also in private hearings. And one of the allegations that former intelligence officer with the NRO, NGIA, David Grusch makes is that the Vatican was involved during the Mussolini regime in assisting the transfer of alleged non-human technology, a craft of some kind that was allegedly recovered at Magenta in Italy in 1933, and that technology was transferred on to the US government secretly at the end of World War II. What do you think about that allegation? Do you find it plausible that the Vatican, a religious organization, would be involved in such a transfer?
I think anything's plausible. We've had multiple incidences when the CIA has now come forward and said, and it's been reported actually that they have a recovery unit. What the heck are they recovering? I think that says more about it. The Catholic Church, there's a lot of mysteries there. I'm not a Catholic. I've got a lot of friends that are Catholic. My best friend is, as a matter of fact. So I don't doubt any of this. I think it's very plausible. I've looked into that a little more than I'm telling you. And I've talked to people that are in the know that actually think that is legitimate. But again, until somebody produces the saucer or the body, it doesn't exist. And that's, we're going to have to get it out there. And everybody loves the mystique of the Catholic Church and the Vatican and all the things that they claim, people, non-Catholics like myself, claim they have. So I'll leave that up to my Catholic friend if he thinks it's plausible. But I'm a little skeptical, but I'm not totally in denial that, I don't totally deny it.
And Paul Thigpen, obviously you do have knowledge of at least Catholic theology and history. Do you find it plausible that the Vatican might have been involved in assisting the United States in the retrieval of an alien spacecraft that was recovered from Magenta, Italy in 1933?
I certainly think it's possible. There are folks I know have studied it and said that the information that was put out several decades ago about it, that I don't hear him saying it was a hoax, but just that it wasn't sufficient really to be convincing. But my conversations, with you, convinced me that Dave Grusch probably has evidence that wasn't part of that, and so and he seems to be convinced that it happened. So all I'm saying is that I think it's possible. Simply for this, think about the situation. By 1944, Mussolini's been executed by his own people. The government's fallen apart. Things are very unstable. You still got the Germans hanging in there, and they were known, I'm sure the Vatican would have known, to be looking into this kind of stuff. The Russians were doing their own advances. If I were the Pope, and I'm just speculating, if I were the Pope and I knew that this had happened and was there, and that there was a chance that such a thing could get into the hands of the Russians or the Germans, or even the mafia to sell to the highest bidder, I might conclude that the safest, most moral thing to do would be to find some way to help the United States get it. They would be the one actor that I would trust the most. I think that's just my own thinking about it. So I think it is possible.
Well, gentlemen, I think we'll have to leave it there. But Paul, your answer does leave open the intriguing possibility that for 80, 90 years, the Vatican, one of the greatest religious institutions on the planet, may well have known about the existence of real evidence, hard evidence of a non-human intelligence engaging with this planet. I guess time will tell. But look, I have to thank both of you for joining us on Reality Check, and I hope you have a happy Easter break, and look forward to seeing you on the other side. Thank you both, gentlemen.
Thank you, Ross. Thank you, Congressman.
Thank you, guys. Pleasure. Now I'm going to go read my Bible for you. Thank you, Paul.
So I found that conversation very intriguing. It really does raise the possibility that the Vatican knows a lot more than it's letting on. And I can only hope that, as Congressman Tim Burchett is intimating in a lot of his public comments, we may soon see more public hearings and more revelations from whistleblowers. Now, one of the joys of Reality Check is we get to hear from you all, and there's been a lot of questions coming in from my audience, and I just want to answer some of those questions. One of the most common questions we get from people is this one from a guy who's got the Twitter handle Empirical Peace. Why don't the whistleblowers come out with their stories simultaneously? This would neutralize retaliatory actions by the secret keepers. In fact, any retaliation would expose their deceit. Someone needs to organize this. And my dear friend, Empirical Peace, I assure you, I have tried. One of the problems we have is that the the good people who are operating on the inside, who are, I'm told, working inside this so-called legacy crash retrieval reverse engineering program, working allegedly on non-human technology, they are all operating under very, very tight non-disclosure agreements and security clearances. And that's how they make their living. They're good people. They're patriots. They're people who love their country. They don't like the idea of sticking their necks out on public television or in Congress because in all likelihood, it'll get shot off. And even though there may be safety in numbers, they think individually. So they're all terrified of losing their security clearance. And the best way of intimidating people inside this system is to remove their security clearance. And this is why Senator Chuck Schumer's legislation was so important. It was neutralized so ruthlessly and effectively by, in particular, Congressman Turner, Mike Turner from Ohio, who just didn't want that legislation to go through in its current form. It would have provided those whistleblowers with the protections they needed. It would have given them an exemption from the non-disclosure agreements and from those security clearances that forbade them from talking about those compartmentalized secrets. So I do think there's a pretty good reason why, even though there might be safety in numbers in many instances for whistleblowers, in this particular instance, this is a secret that's being so well kept and so the bullying and intimidation of these witnesses is so fierce, it's not an easy thing for them to step up and be counted. Let's just have a look at another couple of questions. Oh, here's one. Who would you like to see replace Sean Kirkpatrick? If you could pick someone, who would it be? I recently had the pleasure of meeting Colonel Carl Nell, who's a former chief of the UAP task force. Magnificent warrior intellect. I've never before met somebody inside the military who's quite so bright and sharp and well attuned to the UAP issue. So if there was one person I'd put and say he should be there, it would be Colonel Carnell. And frankly, for that very reason, I don't think it's going to happen. One more question. It seems as if there is pretty solid insider certainty that there is irrefutable evidence that the US government is indeed being dubious on this issue. Why then can you not please provide this credible evidence to the public? This issue will not press forward when there is a possible debunk. And I completely agree with you. I think the whole UAP social media community is just going to have to be a lot more patient. Truth will out. Whistleblowers will come forward, but they need time. I'm in conversation with some of them at the moment where they're wrestling with that decision. A number of them are going through the DOPSA process, applying for the Defence Office pre-publication security review approval system like David Grusch did. They're hoping that they can get clearance to speak before a public hearing of Congress. It's a hell of a lot safer for them than it is for them to appear on national television in obvious breach of their security clearance and their NDA. And look, I was sad to hear from Tim Burchett that he's also had threats from people who are impatient with the pace of change and the pace of transparency and accountability. I've had the same problem. I've had people outright threaten me in really appalling ways because they're just frustrated and angry that things aren't going as fast as they would like. I've had a lot of people say to me, I should just say I know where this large UAP craft is located. And I've explained very strong reasons exist for why that particularly national security sensitive installation shouldn't be revealed. Ultimately, we're all part of a very good alliance, the Five Eyes Alliance, that has kept world peace and security since the end of World War II. The Yakuza Agreement, the Five Eyes, an alliance between my country, Australia, and the United States, England, Canada, New Zealand. It's really important. And for the good reason, we don't want to jeopardize vital national security concerns. So there has to be a balance. And even though people would love me as a journalist just to come out and spew everything I know about the subject, I actually do think there are very good reasons to be cautious. But I do think there's reason for optimism. And I think we can only wait and see what comes out of Congress and other quarters. More on that soon. Thank you very much for watching Reality Check. I hope you enjoyed that very stimulating conversation between Representative Tim Burchett and Professor retired Paul Thigpen. See you again. Thanks for watching. Go to joinnn.com to find NewsNation on your television provider. And please don't forget to click that red subscribe button to ensure you get more of NewsNation's unbiased and fact-driven news coverage.